This episode of The Reality Check is brought to you by HelloFresh. Forget takeout. HelloFresh delivers all the ingredients for delicious, healthy meals anyone can prepare at home in less than 30 minutes. And HelloFresh is giving our Canadian checkers 50% off their first order. Go to hellofresh.ca and use promo code REALITY50 to get 50% off your first order. That's hellofresh.ca, promo code REALITY50. This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for February 13th, 2017, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Hello.
And producer Pat.
Hi, everyone.
We have a fantastic show for you today. Christina is going to look into myths that came from TV and movies. Adam is going to look into whether the Statue of Liberty is modeled after a black or Muslim woman.
Indeed.
But first, you may have heard that the United States will be taxing goods from Mexico so that Mexico pays for the border wall. But is that how tariffs work? Let's explore. Give you some of the basics. As Homer's brain said to himself, money can be exchanged for goods and services. Goods and services can also be sold between different countries. If there is a tax or duty to be paid on a particular class of imports or exports, that is a tariff. Basically, a tax, typically on imports. Most economists think international trade is a good thing, as it provides a greater range of products for consumers. Things that reduce access to goods and services, like tariffs, are thought to be inefficient and a negative distortion in the market. Leading to the question, why are there tariffs? Well, Brent Radcliffe on Investopedia had a good rundown of the main reasons for the existence of tariffs, which I'm going to paraphrase now. As you can imagine, many of these are quite political in nature.
Yeah.
Number 1. Protecting domestic employment. If increased competition from imported goods leads to a reduction in purchases from domestic companies, this can be threatening. There's a quote, "These domestic companies may fire workers or shift production abroad to cut costs, which means higher unemployment and a less happy electorate. Often, it is argued that it is unfair of foreign companies to use cheap labor and the poor working conditions that they have to make their products, so the playing field isn't level. This is reasonable or preposterous depending on how you view things." Number 2, protecting consumers. Sometimes a government may put a tariff on a product that they believe may hurt their citizens. Investopedia gives the example of South Korea placing a tariff on imported beef from the United States if it thinks that it might be diseased. It would be possible to make the tariff so high that it wouldn't be worth it to import it.
That's such a weird... So we don't really want you to have this thing, so we're going to make you also lose money while you get exposed to it negatively. It just seems like...
Well, they can also just flat out ban it, which they have done, right?
It seems like if it's a legitimate risk and not just
well, yes,
interested in making money, maybe that's what you do.
Mm-hmm. Number 3 is protecting infant industries, and this is a full-on quote. "The government of a developing economy will levy tariffs on imported goods in industries in which it wants to foster growth. This increases the prices of imported goods and creates a domestic market for domestically produced goods, while protecting those industries from being forced out by more competitive pricing. It decreases unemployment and allows developing countries to shift from agricultural products to finished goods." Now, do you guys understand when I say all that? What that means?
Well, the idea that some countries would try and move into like a space that is like a higher, let's say, grade good above and beyond agriculture, they would put tariffs on those things so that they could then be sort of the leader in that industry.
Right. It's a way to at least not just lead, but even have some sort of role. If you're trying to start off some industry and then the rest of the world is already competing with you, you're already behind, you can't quite quote-unquote compete fairly. So if you put a tariff on something, those goods have a higher price and then you can produce it for less domestically to give you an advantage.
As long as the other countries don't similarly put a tariff when you export it, which then it's kind of zero.
Very good, Adam. Yes, international trade does come into this very soon. So the idea of protecting infant industries sounds good, and most countries do this, but it could lead to the production of lower quality goods because there is no competition. Again, if you have some sort of domestic protection, no one is trying to force you to do better because they are highlighting that you don't have to compete in the same way.
Fair.
As well, the tariff is a subsidy of sorts on the industry, and that is a cost. There's a deeper meaning that, in a way, the government and the consumer, in a way, is subsidizing the industry itself, and over the long run, that can cause problems.
Do you mean actually subsidizing? Because sometimes there really is a subsidy.
No, not directly. No, okay. It's indirectly. Number 4 is national security. Now, this isn't quite a tariff, but I thought I'd quickly mention that trade barriers are sometimes used instead of tariffs to protect industries that critically serve national security. In general, the defense industries of countries have barriers or tariffs protecting them.
Can you give us an example of that, Darren?
You can imagine almost anything to do with, say, aerospace, defense, missiles, military. Those contracted jobs are not going to be to another country because that country then have access to intelligence that you wouldn't want them to have, and you might not even trust them to supply the weapons you're going to use to then fight them in a future war.
Look at this tank I bought from another country. Oh, it just blew itself up.
Exactly. And the final one I'm going to discuss is retaliation, as Adam mentioned. Like children on the schoolyard seeking justice, if one country thinks another is violating fair notions of trade, they may use tariffs to settle things. Radcliffe gives this example. Quote, if France believes that the United States has allowed its wine producers to call its domestically producing sparkling wines champagne, a name specific to the Champagne region of France, for too long, it may levy a tariff on imported meat from the United States.
Wow.
If the U.S. agrees to crack down on improper labeling, France is likely to stop its retaliation. Retaliation can also be employed if a trading partner goes against the government's foreign policy objectives.
Well, you say retaliation, but you could also call it a bargaining chip or something. Right?
Business, my friend, is just business. Now let's get to why I covered this in the first place. There was a meme. Of course there was a meme. And it goes like this. It's an image with text. It's several lines of text. The first is, Jose sells an avocado to John for $5. Donald Trump imposes a 20% tariff to pay for Mexico border wall. Now Jose sells an avocado to John for $6. $5 plus the 20%, which is $1.
Yeah.
The U.S. collects $1 from Jose. Jose still makes $5. Who pays for the wall? Now, in this case, Jose is passing the full cost of this $1 onto John, thus having the consumer pay for the tariff.
Yes.
Is this how it works? Where does the money go? Who benefits here? Wikipedia nicely summarizes. Typical analyses find that tariffs tend to benefit domestic producers and government at the expense of consumers, and that the net welfare effects of a tariff on the importing country are negative. Investopedia says, more elaborately, tariffs have uneven effects. Taxes increase government revenue, as well, as implied recently, reduced competition helps the domestic markets. Consumers, though, typically pay more, both individuals and businesses, because businesses are also counted as consumers in the broad sense. These effects can be different over time as individuals and organizations adapt. Now, in the short run, higher prices can reduce consumption. This is just basic economics that, something costs more, I'm going to buy less of it. That's assuming the good isn't a necessity or a perceived necessity. This goes to the concept of price elasticity, but I won't delve into it. In the general, though, if the price goes up, typically you buy less. But for some goods, say you're addicted to tobacco, you'll just pay more money. Or if you need food, you're just going to buy food no matter what. But there's usually other goods you can substitute in the broad category of food. Businesses may decrease in efficiency, and substitutes are created. This is what I meant, that if you're not going to buy A, you'd buy something very similar to A. Again, new businesses might come into existence because now there's a higher price of the good itself. So all these different little effects happen. So more competition is possible if domestic producers can raise their prices. Or they don't have to lower theirs. It's a similar thing. Now, what I mean by this is that, say now avocados are selling for $6, but domestic people can still kind of make them for $5. There's like, I can make more money if I just start making avocados and selling them domestically. Maybe making avocados isn't the best example because you usually have to grow in a certain region. But you can imagine making a good which now you think is going to go for a higher price in the market. Therefore, more firms are likely to enter the market. It's not so much that the prices themselves are being raised, but a lower price, in theory, would be available. So when they say a consumer is paying too much, it's not because the 5 went to a 6, but it could be that the price really should be a 4, so people are overpaying for it. Somewhat like milk in Canada.
But alternatively, if Jose is trying to sell his avocado for $6, but Hank next door has always been selling them for $6, I'm just not going to bother going to Mexico.
Well, no, you wouldn't. Exactly. Now, with less disposable income, because this is what happens too, if people are paying more, the public may turn to government for more services. This is the really, if you think the long-term effects of something, that if I have to pay more for goods that I perceive as a necessity, I'll just have less money. And then maybe I now want the government to provide more healthcare or something else because I just have less money. There's all these different effects and causes that come out of changing market policies.
So it sort of pushes certain people who are close to the poverty line below it and changes a lot of issues.
It just might, right? It seems like in this case, if you use a tariff, which is basically a tax, we'll say on an import, it's just going to raise the price of goods, and that's not going to really help out anyone in the long run. Isn't there any way that someone could get around this and actually have someone pay more money? There's something called the border adjustment tax. Now, We're going to link to an article from the Washington Post on our website, trcpodcast.com.
Great website.
The Washington Post says this will work. It's a way to basically tax imports in a way that you don't tax exports, to give companies, domestic companies, a break. Okay? Now, Planet Money actually had a whole recent episode on this saying it won't work. So much like economists, you have one person with a bunch of PhDs say one thing and then other people with a bunch of PhDs say another thing. The general idea is that if you are importing something and then you have to suddenly pay more for it, as we know, businesses, they don't just absorb the cost. They don't just say like, oh, I guess I'll just make less money. They raise the prices. And that's the thing with economics. As soon as you do one thing, it causes something else, and that causes something else to happen. And you may not end up in a situation you didn't really want in the first place. So I'd say listen to the Planet Money episode if you're curious about this border adjustment tax. They did say in that Planet Money episode that over the long run, this may help domestic companies because then it might employ more people and have a greater safety of production in the United States, say, because they're not taxing exports in the same way. But it does seem there's no clear way to have Mexico pay for this wall.
So at the end of the day, he's making U.S. citizens pay for that wall.
Kind of, yes. Almost always tariffs hurt the consumer and businesses and benefit the government. And now we turn to Christina, who's going to explore myths that came from TV and movies.
Over the years, TV shows and movies have done their fair share of perpetuating myths. A couple of quick examples, lemmings throwing themselves off of cliffs. Thank you, 1958 Disney nature documentary. Or bulls getting enraged when they see the color red, thanks to cartoons like Bugs Bunny, when bulls are actually colorblind. I came across a fun article about various myths we probably believe because of TV and movies, and did a quick, albeit unscientific poll of a few friends, and sure enough, many reacted surprised. So I'm just going to breeze through a couple of them for the sake of time. If you want more in-depth info, check out the show notes for this episode at trcpodcast.com. Number 1, a defibrillator shock can restart a stopped heart. We've seen this dramatic scene countless times in shows and films. Someone's heart stops and they begin to flatline. A paramedic or other medical professional grabs 2 paddles, rubs them together, shouts clear, holds the paddles down on the patient's chest, and shocks them, literally, back to life. It's true that defibrillators can be very useful, just not when someone is flatlining.
Really? James Bond didn't resuscitate himself?
I linked to actually a great detailed explanation about why in Gizmodo. Medically, a flatline is known as asystole, which is a state of no electrical activity or contraction from the heart, and therefore no blood flow. So it may sound sensical that if there's no heart contraction, you would try to contract it with a shock, but you first need some sort of electrical impulse to work with, which is why the device works when someone is going into cardiac arrest, not when they've already flatlined. Number 2. Using chloroform to knock someone unconscious for hours. Another ubiquitous big screen scene is...
Sorry, my phone buzzed, and I have it on because I'm waiting to do your sound, so can you just start that again? Number 2?
I find roofies more fun.
Do you want me to do the title too?
Just number 2.
Number 2. Using chloroform to knock someone unconscious for hours. Another ubiquitous big screen scene is the old cloth soaked in chloroform, which when you hold it over an unsuspecting victim's mouth and nose, incapacitates them instantly, and they fall to the ground unconscious. I've never given this one much thought because I've seen it so many times, I just assumed it was plausible.
Me too.
And I knew chloroform was used as an anesthetic, right, dating back to the 1800s. But in reality, it's nearly impossible to incapacitate someone using chloroform, and it takes a good 5 minutes of inhaling a cloth soaked in chloroform before you'd feel the chemical's effects and lose consciousness.
It's even longer than it took an Ace Ventura.
After that, you'd need a continuous supply in order to keep your victim unconscious, and not to mention, if you need them alive, you'd have to support their chin to prevent their tongue from blocking their airways, suffocating them.
Yeah.
So much for those great sort of mafioso scenes we see in like movies like Goodfellas or whatever, where they throw someone in the trunk and they're unconscious for hours.
I mean, it helped that they stabbed and shot the guy in the trunk.
That probably does help.
Cement shoes.
Number 3, shooting 2 guns at separate targets at the same time. The only time I've ever held a gun, let alone shot a gun, was at the gun store in Las Vegas. So it would never have occurred to me that aiming at 2 targets at once is hardly possible. Sure, it looks super cool when the movie hero runs down a corridor shooting 2 guns, obliterating the bad guys. There's even a name for it called dual wielding, and Mythbusters even tested this trope. But in order to shoot a gun accurately, you need the sights to line up, and it would be very challenging to shoot 2 guns simultaneously and accurately hit your targets, since you'd have to focus a different eye on each gun and have them close together to use the sights.
So you need to be a gecko.
Pretty much.
Okay, got it.
If a gecko could shoot 2 guns at the same time.
Well, the Rango, isn't Rango a gecko?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Johnny Depp, that Johnny Depp movie. Yeah. I haven't seen it either. I linked to a video from a tactical instructor who breaks down why dual wielding only really works in videos and movies.
Having done no research at all, I'm going to defend this one. And that's because I think, at least in certain movies, there's enough people around where one of the guns is pointing often that you can at least get 1 or 2 of them and or some cover fire. I also imagine someone maybe like Annie Oakley or a highly trained special born like agent might be able to pull this off if they have had so much practice that they can almost trust the angle of where their arm is.
You're kind of shooting from the hip with 2 guns rather than aiming either of them.
Correct.
Really.
Sort of, but that is why I say simultaneously and accurately hit your targets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Number 4, silencers, as the name advertises, makes guns completely quiet. So we saw the new John Wick movie just this past weekend, and there's a scene where Wick and a peer, played by Common, are quote-unquote conspicuously shooting at each other across a crowded subway area. Okay. So when I say conspicuously, they're hiding the guns under their jackets.
Spoiler!
When not firing them at each other. It's a very entertaining scene which relies on silencers to pull it off, of course. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that whoosh sound effect used in movies when silencers are used.
Is Pat going to substitute that in? Because that was not the sound effect I'm used to. You know that one that goes prang?
Yeah, that one.
You mean like a...
Use your imagination. So the crowd on the platform seems pretty oblivious to the gunfight, but in real life, they would be likely running for cover. Because in reality, a silencer or a suppressor only dampens the noise a gun makes, but it's nowhere near silent. Producer Pat, can you play that audio file of a Glock 36 handgun being shot with a silencer on it? Yeah, hardly the sound effect we're used to in movies.
No, that's pretty loud. I actually just saw John Wick, the first one, and there's silencers there, and there's silencers that are used there, and they're relatively silent gunshots.
So an unsilenced gunshot is around 140 to 160 decibels.
Oh my.
Which is in the can permanently damage your hearing range.
Sure.
But a silencer reduces the noise level of most commercially available firearms down to around 120 or 130 decibel range.
Okay, so like I think anything over 80 would actually damage your hearing permanently, wouldn't it?
As low as 85 dB. Hearing loss can occur as low as 85 dB, yeah. So as a frame of reference, an ambulance siren is typically between 100 and 140 dB. According to independent tests of commercially available silencers, the average suppression level is around 30 dB, which is only really similar to the average suppression level from ear protection gear used on firing ranges.
Fascinating. Mm-hmm. Everyone's going to have to use their crossbows more.
And the silencer weakens it slows the speed of the bullet, does it not?
From what I've read, I don't think that modern silencers do that, Adam. Mm-hmm. I do know that there's reasons why people use silencers, like snipers, for instance, or at night, you don't see that flash.
Oh, okay.
So I have to throw this one in just because, Dr. Stu, and we just did a show with him, an asteroid belt is dense and crowded. So we recently saw the movie Passengers, and without really spoiling anything there's a scene where the spaceship is going through what looks like an asteroid belt, and the rocks are dangerously close together. Duh, it's a space movie, so what a surprise. But in reality, there are many kilometers of vacuum between asteroids. The average distance between asteroids in the main belt is about 965,000 kilometers or 600,000 miles. And so, a little spoiler alert, Pat will be posting the rest of the Exposing Pseudo-Astronomy versus TRC crossover show. But one of Dr. Stu's questions in a game of Name That had to do with how dense the asteroid belt is. And he threw a little shade on Star Wars, didn't he, Adam? And then you corrected him?
In the first Star Wars, they think they're in an asteroid belt and it's very dense, but it's actually the destroyed remnants of Alderaan. So it is possible that the destroyed remnants of Alderaan are denser, depending on how, recently it was destroyed. But in Empire Strikes Back, they go through an asteroid field and it looks the same, and they do that in Episode 2 as well. So it's a common thing in Star Wars. So he is right to have called them out.
So that's it for me. One very quick one. The pin of a grenade can be dramatically pulled out with one's teeth. No, it can't. The person would likely have no teeth afterward, and the grenade would still have the pin in it.
If it were that easy to pull off, then it would just come out in your pocket, and people would just get blown up all the time, right?
Is the Statue of Liberty modeled on a black or a Muslim woman?
There are really two questions here. They both may be true. They both may be false. One may be true, one might be false. Was the Statue of Liberty based on a black woman? And was the Statue of Liberty based on a Muslim woman? If you believe everything you read on social media, you'll think surely she was. I've seen articles like this thrown around lately, as the US president has instituted some less than progressive policies regarding immigration and Muslim people. One idea, popular in late 2015, is that the Statue of Liberty was originally a Muslim woman. A separate origin story is the idea that the Statue of Liberty was a black woman as a sign of the black soldiers who won the Civil War in the United States. She was originally to have broken shackles, but they were deemed to be too offensive and dropped. Let's first look at the black Civil War soldier idea, and then we'll move on to the other. I found articles written by Snopes and the U.S. National Park Service which agree that this is in fact not the case. Let me get into why. I'm not an expert on U.S. or French history, but with a little examination, this idea falls apart. Snopes, a site which often deals with email chain letters, references one detailed story describing this. The source which is given is a book, The Journey of the Songhai People, by a Dr. Jim Haskins. Jim Haskins wrote no such book and has made no such claim.
Boom.
The idea that black soldiers were well known for playing a pivotal role in winning the Civil War doesn't fit with what was known in the era. While some black soldiers did fight in the war, many were not allowed to until the final stages. They represented about 12% of the army, which is considerable. This is more well known recently, but in the years following the Civil War, it wasn't very commonly known, and given the racism of the time, their role was minimized or ignored by most people. When it comes to the chains that were considered and said to have been dropped because they were inappropriate, they were considered at some point, but they were abandoned due to the aesthetics. The chains being broken were a symbol of liberty, but not having to do specifically with slavery. The Statue of Liberty was a symbol of American freedom. It was given by the French as a wish for their own nation to have similar liberty. The Statue of Liberty holds a tablet with the date of July 4th, 1776 inscribed. That is the date of the United States Declaration of Independence. If this were about slavery and the Civil War, it would have had a different date inscribed. Perhaps it would have been the date of the Emancipation Proclamation, which is January 1st, 1863, when slavery was abolished in the North, or the date of the end of the Civil War, June 22nd, 1865, when the Emancipation Proclamation was enforced throughout the rest of the U.S. As for the idea that the statue was modeled after a black woman, I'll get into the other idea, which will touch a bit on that. So here are a few headlines from late in 2015. The Statue of Liberty was originally a Muslim woman, the Smithsonian. The Statue of Liberty was born a Muslim, the Daily Beast. The Statue of Liberty, quote, based on a Muslim woman, the Huffington Post. So what's this about? The Statue of Liberty was designed by Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi of France. In 1855, he visited the Nubian monuments of Abu Simbel, which has a tomb guarded by these large figures. You can see that in the second Transformers movie. He had an idea for the inauguration of the Suez Canal. He wanted a massive, robe-clad woman representing Egypt to stand at Port Said, the northern entrance to the canal in Egypt. The concept was said to have begun as a fellah, or Arab peasant, and evolved into a colossal goddess. His concept was of a veiled peasant woman, which would stand 86 feet high on a 48-foot pedestal. But the Suez Canal was expensive, and the plan to build the statue was either rejected and possibly never even seriously considered. These articles suggest that Bartholdi later repurposed the concept into the Statue of Liberty. But what would this even mean? Would this woman have been Muslim? Probably. Islam is the dominant religion of Egypt, currently practiced by about 85% of the population, and it was dominant in the 19th century as well. An average Egyptian woman from the area would have therefore likely been Muslim. But Bartholdi was inspired by ancient Egypt and the Colossus of Rhodes in ancient Greece, neither of which are Muslim. That said, the theoretical character that would have been that statue would indeed have been Muslim. But that idea went with the original concept. That this concept was similar to the Statue of Liberty doesn't actually mean that the Statue of Liberty is a Muslim woman, as this is a completely different project with some similarities, but the religion of the statue wasn't really one of them. It should also be noted that statues are not common in Islam, as depictions of people which could be worshipped are forbidden by their religion. If we look at these clickbaity headlines again and consider if they have any validity, the Statue of Liberty was originally a Muslim woman. Maybe. The Statue of Liberty was born a Muslim. Not really. The Statue of Liberty, quote, based on a Muslim woman. Not really. One needs to be very generous to say that any of them are at all true, despite the fact that they present the actual facts much as I have. It was upon reading one of these articles originally that I just thought that it didn't really add up, and the premise in the headline wasn't backed up by the substance of the article. So who was the statue actually based on? There's this idea that her face is black, and that this followed along with the design somehow. Most agree that Bartholdi based the statue on his mistress, who he later married, and his mother. His mother was the inspiration for the face, and his mistress for the torso. Neither were black, neither were Muslim. A photo included with some of the viral posts about this topic include a graphic of the original Statue of Liberty, which was refused by America. This image shows a clearly black woman holding a lantern in a white dress. The statue actually has color on it. Her skin is dark. The dress is white. This is the Lady Liberty statue in Saint Martin, which was sculpted in 2007. Definitely not the original Statue of Liberty. Further, some images show the original Statue of Liberty as being a darker color. Some only include the face, and it is of a brownish color, though color photographs were rare at the time and they don't have a lot of quality to that color. This is simply because the Statue of Liberty is made of copper and had a metallic copper finish. Much like the roofs of Canada's Parliament buildings, this copper eventually, and predictably, turned green due to oxidation. So they knew that the Statue of Liberty would turn green, but it was not originally green.
Which is very interesting and obvious now that you've pointed it out. But to try to imagine it not green, but brassy is quite stunning, especially imagine reflected sunlight.
Yeah, so there's a link in the show notes that shows sort of what it would have looked like. And yeah, it looks pretty cool, yeah, and it would have shined really in a really neat way. So this happens to some older pennies, but most pennies in circulation don't do this because of the friction that occurs when they're handled in your pockets and things like that. The Statue of Liberty was not based on a black woman or a Muslim woman. An early concept, which was similar to what was eventually the Statue of Liberty, would have been a Muslim woman, but that statue was never built. Clearly, the Statue of Liberty is green because she represents an Orion slave girl who has rebelled against her master.
Strong conclusion.
Thank you.
Let's also keep in mind that it was obviously based on really, really tall women. Thanks, Adam. And thanks for joining us once again. I showed you what a tariff is, how it typically hurts the consumer, and how it doesn't make sense that Mexico is going to pay for the wall through tariffs. Christina gave us a delectable rundown of myths that we've got from television and movies, and quite frankly, I'm shocked over some of them. Thanks, Christina. And Adam showed us that the Statue of Liberty was based neither on a black woman nor a Muslim woman, but a tall, brassy woman. Until next time, think better, act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Happy birthday, Adam.
Yay, happy birthday, Adam. For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
What other podcasts can you debunk movie myths and get your movie trivia all in one show.
I think there are about 1,000 other ones.
Probably.
No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.